I didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. Jordan Mitchell simply reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a sealed envelope he had been carrying for 3 months, and set it on the conference table, like a man who had already made peace with this moment, long before anyone else in the room even realized the moment had arrived. Victoria Harrington, Billionaire founder. The woman whose name was carved in marble above the building's entrance stopped mid-sentence, because the man she had just dared to quit was actually quitting. Drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moved you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The morning it all changed. Jordan Mitchell woke up at 4:47 a.m., the same way he had every weekday for the past decade, not because an alarm told him to, but because his body had learned that survival required him to move before the rest of the world opened its eyes. He lay still for exactly 30 seconds. That was his ritual. 30 seconds of silence before the weight of the day pressed down on him. He stared at the ceiling of his small apartment in the east side of Chicago, listening to the radiator knock and the faint sound of a garbage truck somewhere down the block, and he let himself breathe. Just breathe. Then he got up. The kitchen light flickered twice before it caught. He'd been meaning to replace the bulb for 2 weeks, but kept forgetting to buy one, and he moved without thinking through the routine he had memorized so deeply it lived somewhere below conscious thought. Coffee first, then eggs, then the careful business of packing Amara's lunch, because his daughter was 8 years old, and particular in the way that only children who had lost something too young ever became particular. She wanted her apple slices cut a specific way. She wanted her sandwich without the crust. She wanted a little folded note tucked inside the bag, even on days when Jordan barely had the energy to write one. He always wrote one. "You are the bravest person I know. Have a great day, baby girl. Dad." Some mornings the words came easily. Other mornings he had to stand at the counter for a long moment, pen in hand, and remind himself that she needed to see those words even when he didn't quite believe in anything himself. This morning was one of those mornings. He tucked the note in anyway. At 6:15, he walked Amara to school. She held his hand the entire way, which she only did when she sensed something in him without being able to name it. She was perceptive like that. Sharp. She had her mother's eyes, the kind that looked at you and seemed to read the paragraph behind your face, not just the word on the surface. "Dad," she said at the school gate, looking up at him with those eyes. "Yeah, baby." She studied him for a second. "You okay?" He smiled. The smile was real, even if everything behind it was complicated. "I'm always okay when I'm with you." She seemed to consider this, decided it was enough, and hugged him around the waist, before running through the gate to join her friends. Jordan watched her go. He stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he turned and walked toward the train station, and somewhere between the school gate and the platform he made a decision, not dramatically, not with any particular surge of emotion, but quietly, the way you make a decision when you've already been living with it for months, and your body has simply been waiting for the right morning to confirm it. Today was the day. Sterling Vale Corporation occupied the top 6 floors of a glass tower in the financial district. From the lobby looking up, you could see the building disappear into the low gray sky, like it was trying to become part of the clouds. The kind of architecture designed to make you feel small before you even stepped inside. Jordan had never been made small by buildings, only by the people inside them. He arrived at 7:03 a.m., earlier than almost everyone, except the overnight security team and a few analysts who hadn't gone home, swiped his badge, and took the elevator to the operations floor. He had done this 10,000 times. He knew which fluorescent light in the hallway buzzed too loud, and which water fountain ran cold. He knew the name of every person on the janitorial staff. He knew the sound the printer on the east side made when it was about to jam. I knew this building, the way you know a house you grew up in. Every creak, every weakness, every secret it kept. He set his bag down at his desk, poured a cup of coffee from the community machine, black no sugar because the creamer was always gone by the time he arrived, and opened his laptop. He had 4 email threads to manage before 8:30. A supplier in Memphis was behind on a delivery that 3 departments were waiting on. A compliance report needed reviewing. Two of his team leads had flagged a scheduling conflict that was going to cascade into overtime costs if nobody intervened before the week started. He started working. This was what Jordan did. He solved things before they became disasters. He was the man who saw the smoke before anyone else smelled it, who quietly walked across the building and turned off the burner that everyone else had forgotten was on. He had been doing this for 10 years. He had been underpaid for 10 years. He had been overlooked for 10 years. He had been appreciated in the passive, hollow way that organizations appreciate infrastructure, the way you appreciate electricity, until the lights go out, without ever actually thinking about what's holding everything together. His official title was Operations Manager, Warehouse and Logistics Division. The title paid $78,000 a year. That was a decent salary by certain measures. By the measure of what he actually did, the decisions he made, the crises, he prevented the gap. He filled between what the executives thought was happening and what was actually happening on the ground. It was an insult. He knew it. He had known it for years. He stayed because of Amara. He stayed because the benefits were good and the job was stable and walking away from stable. When you are a single father, raising a child alone in Chicago is not a small thing. It is a calculation you make every morning when you look at your daughter's face and weigh your pride against her safety. Jordan had been weighing. For a long time, the scale had tipped toward staying. But weight accumulates. By 9:30, the senior leadership team had arrived. Jordan could always tell by the change in the building's energy, a certain tension in the air, like the atmosphere before a storm. When the people with power entered the space, and everyone else quietly recalibrated their posture. I had a 10 o'clock meeting with Victoria Harrington's executive team. The subject, a new cost restructuring plan that Victoria had been developing for 6 weeks with a group of outside consultants who had spent a total of 4 days inside the building before presenting their recommendations. Jordan had read the plan. He had read it 3 times actually, because the first time through, he thought he must have missed something. Some piece of data, some analysis, some acknowledgement of the things that were obviously going to go wrong. There was no such acknowledgement. The plan was bold, in the way that plans are bold, when the people creating them do not have to live inside the consequences. It called for consolidating 3 regional distribution centers into one centralized hub, eliminating what the consultants called redundant operational layers, and reducing the workforce by approximately 340 positions over 18 months. On paper, it saved the company $14 million annually. What it did not account for the relationships Jordan had spent years building with regional suppliers. The geographic realities that made consolidated shipping significantly more expensive in practice than in projection. The fact that the 340 redundant positions were not redundant at all. They were the people who knew things, who held institutional memory, who kept the machine running in the way that machines are kept running. Not by executives looking at dashboards, but by human beings who showed up and solved problems every single day. Jordan had written all of this down. He had put it in a report. He had sent the report to 3 people on the executive team. He had received no response. He prepared his talking points for the 10 o'clock meeting anyway. He was not the kind of man who gave up simply because he had been ignored. He believed in showing up. He believed in saying the true thing, even when the room wasn't ready to hear it. His father had taught him that, had drilled it into him growing up on the South Side, in a house where they didn't have much, but they had principle and principle. His father always said was the one thing nobody could take from you if you refused to put it on the table. Jordan walked into the conference room carrying a folder, a legal pad, and the quiet certainty of a man who has done his homework. The room was already half full. 6 executives arranged around one end of a long mahogany table, laptops, open coffees, steaming the particular aura of people who were accustomed to having their conclusions agreed with rather than examined. David Kessler, Chief Financial Officer, the architect of the restructuring plan, sat at Victoria's right hand and did not look up when Jordan entered. He had a way of not looking up that communicated everything. It wasn't rudeness exactly, it was something more precise and more insulting than rudeness. It was the practiced indifference of a man who had decided a long time ago that certain people in the room were furniture. Margaret Chu, the Chief Operations Officer, gave Jordan a small, tight smile. She was not unkind. She simply was not brave. There was a difference, and Jordan had learned to read it. Two other executives whose names he had memorized, but who had never learned his. And then Victoria Harrington. She walked in at exactly 10:02, which was her version of punctuality, close enough to on time that nobody would challenge her for being late, but late enough to establish that her time operated on its own calendar. She wore a charcoal blazer and carried an iPad, and she moved with the focused, unhurried energy of someone who had not experienced uncertainty in a very long time. She sat down, looked at the room. Her eyes passed over Jordan the way they always did, registering his presence, filing it, moving on. "Let's get started," she said. "David, walk us through the implementation timeline." Jordan waited. He sat through 20 minutes of David Kessler explaining the plan with the confidence of a man presenting a proven fact, rather than a projection built on assumptions. The room nodded. Laptops clicked. Someone said, "That's smart," at one point, and Jordan was not sure if they meant it or if they'd simply learned that agreeing made the meetings shorter. When there was a pause, Jordan spoke. "I have some concerns about the consolidation model I'd like to bring to the table." The pause that followed was the kind that has a texture. You could feel the slight recalibration in the room, the mild surprise of furniture speaking. David Kessler finally looked up. "Jordan, this plan has been reviewed by Hartwell Consulting. I understand that. I've read their report." Jordan kept his voice level, measured. He had learned long ago that a black man in a room full of people who expected him to be deferential could not afford to sound anything other than completely in control of himself. Not because he agreed with that expectation. He had never agreed with it, but because he understood that the moment he allowed frustration to color his voice, the conversation would stop being about the substance and start being about his tone. The Hartwell model doesn't account for regional shipping differentials. If we consolidate to the Memphis hub, our average delivery cost on the Eastern Corridor goes up by approximately 23%. I've run the numbers against our last 3 fiscal years. He opened his folder and slid a document down the table. Nobody picked it up. "The consultants addressed that," David said with a patience that managed to be condescending without technically being rude. "They addressed it in a footnote that estimated a 4% increase based on 2019 rate schedules." Jordan held the man's gaze. "Our current carrier agreements have changed significantly since 2019. I can walk you through the updated figures." "That's not what this meeting is for," Victoria said. Her voice wasn't sharp. That was the thing about Victoria Harrington. She rarely needed to raise her voice. She had a way of making "no" sound like a statement of nature rather than a decision. Like she was simply describing how gravity worked. Jordan looked at her directly. "Respectfully, these numbers affect 340 jobs and $14 million in projected savings that I believe are overstated. The families of those 340 employees deserve a complete analysis before a final decision is made." Something shifted in the room. A slight stiffening. The mention of the families. The families were not supposed to enter conference rooms like this one. Conference rooms like this dealt in projections and ratios and efficiency metrics. The families were meant to exist somewhere outside in the abstract in the category of workforce considerations, rather than actual human people with actual children who depended on the decisions made inside this mahogany room. "Jordan." Victoria's tone had the particular quality of a door being gently but firmly closed. "You're an operations manager. Your job is to implement strategy, not design it." "My job," Jordan said quietly, "is to make sure this company functions. That's what I've done for 10 years. And part of making this company function is telling leadership when a decision is going to create problems that won't show up on a quarterly report until it's too late to correct them." David Kessler set his pen down. "Are you saying the executive team doesn't know how to do their jobs?" "I'm saying the executive team hasn't seen the complete data. We have a presentation from one of the top consulting firms in the country. You have a presentation from people who spent 4 days in this building." Jordan heard the edge in his own voice and consciously smoothed it. "I've spent 10 years in this building. I know where the problems live." The room was very quiet. Victoria Harrington looked at him for a long moment. It was the kind of look that takes inventory. Then she said, "If you're so certain you know better, Jordan, then maybe this isn't the right position for you." It was a warning disguised as a suggestion. Everyone in the room recognized it. It was the kind of sentence designed to make a person fold. "Maybe you're right," Jordan said. That was not the response she expected. Her expression shifted barely, just a fraction, the way a face shifts when the ground does something it wasn't supposed to do. "Perhaps," Jordan continued, setting his folder down slowly, "we've reached the limit of what I can accomplish inside the boundaries of this position." "Jordan," Margaret started. "I want to be clear," he said. And there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before, a stillness, a weight, the sound of a man who has made a decision and is no longer carrying any doubt about it. "I'm not saying this out of anger. I've been proud of my work here. I've believed in this company. I still believe in the people who work here. But I've come to understand that my value in this room is conditional. And I can't keep investing everything I have in a place that sees me as a tool rather than a contributor." Nobody said anything of the sort, David said with the reflexive defensiveness of a man who knew exactly what had been said in tones and silences and overlooked documents over many years. Jordan didn't argue the point. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. The envelope had been there since January. He had prepared it on a quiet Sunday evening after Amara fell asleep, sitting at the kitchen table under the flickering light, thinking about his father and about Worth and about the kind of man he wanted his daughter to grow up believing her father was. He had prepared it and sealed it and carried it for 3 months, waiting to know if he would need it. He knew now. He placed the envelope on the table. Victoria looked at it. She looked at him. "What is that?" she asked, though her voice had shifted something in it that wasn't quite there before. Something cautious. "My resignation." The words sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "I've given 2 weeks' notice," Jordan continued, "though I understand if you'd prefer I transition out sooner. Everything I've built is documented. I've made sure of that. Whoever takes over my responsibilities will have access to everything they need." He said this with complete sincerity, because that was the kind of man he was. Even in this moment, his instinct was to make sure things didn't fall apart behind him. Victoria had not moved. She was staring at him with an expression that Jordan had never seen on her face in 10 years. Not anger, not dismissal, not the cool, authoritative calm she usually projected. It was something closer to shock, because she had said, "If you think you can do better, quit," in various forms, in various tones, across several conversations over the past year, in the way that people say things they believe will never be answered. You say, "Go ahead and leave," to someone you are certain will not leave. It is a power move, not an invitation. Jordan had accepted the invitation. He stood up from his chair. He was not in a hurry. He picked up his folder, the one with the data nobody had looked at, and he moved toward the door with the measured, unhurried step of a man who no longer had anything to prove to this particular room. "Jordan," Victoria's voice, sharper now. "Let's not be hasty." He paused, turned back, looked at her with something that was not resentment, not triumph, simply clarity. "I've been here 10 years, Victoria. Hasty isn't a word that applies to this decision." His office was small, more of a large cubicle, really separated from the open floor by a half-wall of frosted glass. He had worked inside it for 6 of his 10 years with the company, and in that time he had made it into a space that felt, if not exactly his, then at least honest. A photo of Amara taped to the side of his monitor, her school picture from 2nd grade, gap-toothed smile, eyes bright enough to hurt. A mug his mother had given him that said, "Strong men make strong families." A small cactus in a blue pot on the corner of the desk because it required very little attention and survived everything. He started packing. He didn't slam drawers. He didn't throw things. He went through the desk the same way he did everything, methodically, without waste. He filled a cardboard box he had brought from the storage room. The photo of Amara, the mug, the cactus, a few books he kept for reference, a notepad with years of handwritten notes that represented in aggregate more institutional knowledge than most of the company's internal documentation combined. People were watching. He could feel it without looking the way you feel. Attention, the particular weight of eyes turned toward you from across an open floor. People had stopped typing. Two of his team leads were standing in the hallway near the elevator with expressions that were impossible to read. A younger analyst, whose name was Darius, had his hands flat on his desk and was watching with the look of someone witnessing something he would be thinking about for a long time. Jordan worked quietly, steadily. His phone lit up with a message from his team lead, Priya Jordan. "What's happening? Please tell me this isn't what it looks like." He typed back, "I'll explain everything. You're going to be fine. You all are." He meant it. He had spent months quietly documenting everything he knew, not as a contingency plan exactly, but because Jordan Mitchell was the kind of man who understood that the knowledge inside his head belonged to the people who had built things alongside him, and he would not take it with him as a weapon. He sealed the box. He picked it up. He walked through the open floor past the people who watched him without speaking, past the elevator bay, where his team leads stood past the marble wall near the entrance, where Sterling Vale Corporation's mission statement was engraved in silver letters: building trust, creating value, honoring excellence. And he did not look at it because he had memorized it a long time ago and had spent 10 years believing in it more than anyone on the executive floor seemed to. He pushed through the glass doors. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the lobby button. And as the elevator descended, carrying him away from the only place he had dedicated a decade of his life to, Jordan Mitchell did not feel afraid. He did not feel triumphant. He felt something quieter and deeper than both of those things. He felt like himself. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt exactly, completely, entirely like himself. He picked up Amara from school that afternoon. She ran to him at the gate the same way she always did, full speed, no hesitation, the kind of joy that small children have not yet learned to hold back. He caught her and held her, and she asked how his day was. The way she always asked, because she was the kind of kid who paid attention to other people. "Different," he said. "Different good or different bad?" He thought about the conference room, the silence, the envelope on the table, Victoria Harrington's face, the elevator descending. "Different real," he said. She considered this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old philosopher. "Okay," she decided, and took his hand, and they walked home together in the late afternoon light. Just the two of them. The way it had always been, the way it would always be. And for the entire walk, Jordan did not think about what he had lost. He thought about what, for the first time in 10 years, he was free to build. That night, after Amara was asleep, Jordan sat at the kitchen table under the flickering light. He opened his laptop. He started writing. Not a resignation, not a report, not a memo that would be ignored by people who had already made up their minds. Something else entirely. Something that was for the first time entirely his own. Outside Chicago moved through its night sirens and wind, and the distant percussion of a city that never fully went quiet. The radiator knocked. The light flickered. Jordan Mitchell kept writing. Back in the glass tower, Victoria Harrington sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. She sat very still. She was looking at the resignation letter. She had been looking at it for 2 hours, and for the first time in a very long time, the billionaire who controlled everything was experiencing something she did not have a solution for. She was beginning to understand what she had done. She was just not yet ready to admit how much it was going to cost her. The morning after Jordan walked out of Sterling Vale Corporation, Victoria Harrington arrived at the office 40 minutes earlier than usual. This was not something she did. Victoria operated on precision, not early, not late, exactly on time, because arriving early suggested anxiety and arriving late suggested disrespect. And Victoria Harrington had spent 20 years projecting neither. But at 7:20 that Tuesday morning, she was already in her office, already behind her desk, already staring at the resignation letter that she had left sitting exactly where it had been the night before, as though moving it might make the situation more real than she was prepared for it to be. Her assistant Claire knocked at 7:45. "Your 8 o'clock has confirmed, and..." A brief pause. "Should I reach out to HR about the Mitchell vacancy? They're asking how you'd like to proceed." "Not yet," Victoria said. Claire hesitated at the door. "The operations team has already started sending questions to Margaret. about the Memphis supplier accounts, and the quarterly compliance. I said, "Not yet, Claire." The door closed quietly. Victoria pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose and breathed. The Mitchell vacancy. As though Jordan were simply an open slot to be filled, a blank in an org chart waiting for a name to be inserted. She had run Sterling Vale for 15 years, on the premise that systems mattered more than individuals, that the right structure properly maintained could withstand any single person's departure. It was a philosophy that had served her well. People came and people left, and the machine kept running. She believed that this morning, with slightly less certainty than she had believed it the morning before. She picked up her phone and called David Kessler. He answered on the second ring. "I was about to call you. Has anyone from operations been in contact with Memphis yet about the Q2 delivery schedules?" A pause. "I assumed Jordan had a team." "David." Her voice was flat. "Answer the question." "I'll find out." "Do that, and pull whoever Jordan designated as his secondary contact on the Hargreaves account. I need them in my office by 9. Another pause. Longer this time. "Victoria, Jordan didn't have a designated secondary. He was the primary contact on most of the accounts in his division. He's the one who... I'm aware of what he was." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand, and then she set it down very carefully on the desk, because she was the kind of woman who did not throw things even when she wanted to, and right now, she very much wanted to throw something. By noon, the cracks had started showing. It wasn't dramatic the way disasters in movies are dramatic. It didn't announce itself with an alarm or a single catastrophic failure. It was quieter, and in many ways worse than that. It was the accumulation of small things that Jordan had been managing so consistently for so long that nobody had noticed they were being managed at all. The Memphis supplier, a regional freight company called Caldwell Brothers, that handled a third of Sterling Vale's eastern distribution, called at 10:15 to speak with Jordan about a contract renewal that was set to expire at the end of the month. The call was transferred 4 times before landing on a junior analyst named Kevin, who had been with the company for 7 months and did not know that Caldwell Brothers had a specific pricing agreement that Jordan had negotiated personally 2 years ago. An agreement that was not in the company's standard contract database because Jordan had renegotiated it verbally and then memorialized it in a memo that existed in his personal files rather than the shared drive. Kevin told Caldwell Brothers to expect the standard renewal terms. Caldwell Brothers said they'd need to revisit the arrangement given the new terms. Kevin filed the call as resolved and moved on. It would take 3 weeks before anyone understood what that call had actually cost. At 11:30, the scheduling system for the company's Chicago warehouse flagged a conflict that required a judgment call, a staffing overlap that would generate $14,000 in unnecessary overtime unless someone rerouted 2 shifts before 3 p.m. This was exactly the kind of decision Jordan made a dozen times a week, without fanfare, without meetings, without anyone even being aware a decision had needed to be made. The flag sat in the system queue. Nobody had the authority to resolve it without a sign-off from operations management. The shifts ran as scheduled, the overtime posted. At 12:45, Margaret Chu sent Victoria a message. "We need to talk about the Hendricks account. Jordan was in the middle of a dispute resolution, and I can't find any documentation of where things stand." Victoria typed back, "Find it." Margaret replied, "I've had 3 people looking since this morning. There's nothing in the shared drive. Whatever Jordan was doing, he was doing it in his head." Victoria stared at that message for a long time. In his head. 10 years of relationships, processes, institutional knowledge solutions carried not in any folder or database or formal documentation, but in the mind of a man who had been so thoroughly treated as a support function that nobody had ever thought to ask him to write any of it down in a place where it might survive him. She had never asked. She had never considered that she might need to ask. Jordan, meanwhile, spent Tuesday morning at his kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a legal pad making a list. Not a list of grievances. Not a list of everything wrong with Sterling Vale or everyone who had treated him as less than what he was. That kind of list had no future in it, and Jordan was a man oriented toward the future. He made a list of everything he knew how to do. It took a while. By the time Amara came home from school that afternoon, he had filled 4 pages of the legal pad in his small, precise handwriting, and he was sitting back in his chair looking at the pages with the particular expression of a man who is seeing something for the first time that was always there. "You're home," Amara said, stopping at the kitchen doorway. She said it with the careful neutrality of someone trying not to make something into a bigger thing than it needs to be, which was a quality she had in abundance, and which Jordan suspected she got from him. "I'm home," he confirmed. "Were you home yesterday too? Mrs. Patterson said she saw you at the grocery store at 2 o'clock. "I was home yesterday too." Amara set her backpack down, pulled out her homework folder, sat across the table from him. She was quiet for a moment, organizing her papers with the focused deliberateness that always made Jordan feel like he was watching someone much older than 8 years old. "Did you get fired?" she asked without looking up. "No, I quit." She looked up then. Her eyes searched his face the way they always did when she was deciding how worried to be. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. How to take what had happened in that conference room and translate it into something that an 8-year-old could hold without it being too heavy. "Because," he said finally, "I was worth more than what they were giving me, and I decided it was time to act like I knew that." She considered this for a moment. "Like when Tyler Marks kept taking my eraser, and Ms. Johnson said just ignore it, and then I started putting my eraser in my pocket instead. Exactly like that." She seemed satisfied by this. She returned to her homework. Jordan returned to his legal pad. After a few minutes, she said without looking up, "Dad, you're good at a lot of things." "I know," he said. "I'm just reminding you," she said with the tone of someone who has learned that people sometimes need reminding in case you forgot. He didn't answer right away. He looked at his daughter, this small, exact, perceptive person who had somehow arrived in his life and decided to trust him completely, and he felt the particular weight of that trust, which was the heaviest and best thing he had ever carried. "I didn't forget," he said. "Not today." He called Marcus Webb that evening. Marcus was Jordan's oldest friend. They'd grown up 3 blocks apart on the South Side, played ball together, survived the same schools, survived different versions of the same city, and come out the other side of their 30s, still able to call each other without preamble. Marcus ran a small business development company in Hyde Park. He was not wealthy by any corporate standard, but he was successful in the way that people are successful when they've built something genuinely their own. And he understood operations the way Jordan did, from the inside out, not the top down. "You actually did it," Marcus said when Jordan told him. Not a question. More like confirmation of something he had been expecting for a long time. "I actually did it." "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Jordan said. "And good, both at the same time." "That's how it's supposed to feel." Marcus paused. "You know what you're going to do?" "I have some ideas." "Tell me." Jordan looked at the 4 pages of the legal pad. "I know how companies break down. I know what goes wrong in operations when leadership stops listening to the people doing the work. I've been fixing it for 10 years at someone else's company. So fix it at other companies. For myself this time." Marcus was quiet for a beat. "Consulting. To start. Small businesses, mid-size companies that are struggling with operations and can't afford the Hartwell Consultings of the world. People who need real solutions, not a 4-day site visit and a presentation full of projections. You got clients in mind?" "I've got 3 calls I can make tomorrow." Another pause. "Jordan, how long have you been thinking about this?" Jordan looked at the sealed envelope that had traveled in his jacket pocket for 3 months. "Long enough to know I'm not walking into it blind." "Then let's talk about structure," Marcus said, and Jordan could hear him settling in the shift in his voice that meant he was moving from friend mode to business mode. The mode Jordan had watched him inhabit for 20 years with quiet admiration. "Because if you're going to do this right, you need to do it right from the beginning. Not as a freelancer, as a company." They talked for 2 hours. By the end of the call, Jordan had something that felt like a foundation. Sterling Vale Corporation's first full week without Jordan Mitchell was by almost any operational metric a controlled disaster. Controlled in the sense that nothing catastrophically visible happened. No major client was lost. No system completely failed. No event occurred that would appear in a headline or trigger a board-level emergency meeting. From the outside, the company continued to function. But from the inside, people who knew what they were looking at could see the seams. By Wednesday, Margaret Chu had convened an informal task force of 4 people whose entire job was to reconstruct what Jordan had been doing, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she was smart enough to understand that the alternative was waiting until the consequences arrived with enough force to be impossible to ignore. "I wasn't just an operations manager," she told the group in a conference room on the 4th floor. "He was the connective tissue. He knew the suppliers personally. He knew the staffing patterns. He knew when something was about to go wrong before it showed up in any system." "How did he know?" asked one of the analysts. "Because he paid attention," Margaret said. "Because he was actually here, actually talking to people, actually treating the workers like they had things worth saying." She paused. "And because he was brilliant, and nobody bothered to notice because they were too busy noticing his job title." The task force worked through the week. They recovered some of what Jordan had documented. They found his training manuals careful, thorough, written in language that assumed the reader might not have any prior knowledge, because Jordan had always been the kind of person who built systems that other people could use, not systems that made other people dependent on him specifically. They found his supplier contact lists, his scheduling protocols, his escalation procedures. What they could not find or reconstruct or replace: 10 years of relationship capital. The phone calls Jordan made, in which he was not just a company representative, but a human being that people on the other end of the line trusted. The judgment calls. The read of a situation. The instinct that separated a problem that was manageable from a problem that was about to become a crisis. That lived in Jordan, and Jordan was gone. David Kessler presented the week's operational summary to Victoria on Friday afternoon with the particular careful phrasing of someone delivering bad news to a person known for shooting the messenger. "We've identified approximately 14 active issues in operations that Jordan was managing without formal documentation," he said. "We've resolved 4 of them. The remaining 10 require either a specialized knowledge base we don't currently have or relationship access with suppliers that—" "How long to resolve the remaining 10? Victoria asked. David looked at his papers. "Conservative estimate 2 to 3 months, assuming we hire correctly and move quickly." "And the Memphis consolidation plan, implementation timeline?" A longer pause. "We've encountered some complications with the regional shipping rate analysis. It appears Jordan's projections were—" He stopped. "Were what, David?" "Accurate," he said, with the evident discomfort of a man confirming something he had publicly dismissed. His concerns about the Eastern Corridor cost differential appear to be borne out by the updated carrier agreements. "We're currently projecting a 21% increase in regional shipping costs if we proceed with the original consolidation timeline, which would eliminate the majority of the projected savings." "Yes." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "So the plan Jordan warned us about that we dismissed is now projected to cost the company more than it saves." "The modeling suggests—" "I don't need more modeling, David." Her voice was absolutely even. That was the thing people who worked for Victoria Harrington learned to understand: the flatter her voice, the more serious the situation. Anger she expressed with volume. True reckoning she expressed with perfect still quiet. "I need someone to tell me what it's going to cost us to fix this," David told her. She absorbed the number. "Get me the revised projections by Monday," she said. "And David." "Yes. Going forward, when someone in this building raises a concern backed by 10 years of operational experience, I want it treated as something other than a disturbance." She held his gaze. "That's a directive." He nodded once and left. Victoria turned her chair toward the window. She did not look at the city the way she usually looked at it, with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who has won at something. She looked at it the way you look at something when you are calculating what you have missed and what it is going to cost you to get back to where you should have been all along. It was Marcus who first heard that Jordan was consulting, not because Marcus told anyone, but because word moves in the business community the way it always has not, through official channels, not through press releases, but through the side conversations at lunch tables and the calls made between people who trust each other. And within 2 weeks of Jordan leaving Sterling Vale, the quiet truth that Jordan Mitchell was available for consulting work had traveled through a particular network of small and mid-sized Chicago business owners, with the efficient velocity of information that people actually want. His first client was a logistics company in Bridgeport, a family-owned operation that had been bleeding money for 18 months without understanding why. Jordan spent 4 days with them. He talked to the drivers. He talked to the dispatcher. He ate lunch in the break room with the guys who loaded the trucks. And then he sat down with the owner, a third-generation Greek-American man named Stavros, and told him exactly what was wrong and exactly how to fix it. Stavros looked at the report Jordan handed him. He looked at Jordan. "My last consultant charged me $40,000 and told me to optimize my workflows," Stavros said. "What did that mean?" "I don't know. He never explained it." Stavros turned a page of the report. "You're telling me the problem is that my dispatch schedule doesn't account for the shift change at the warehouse on Ashland, which creates a 2-hour gap every Tuesday and Thursday that my drivers are filling with overtime." "That's part of it, yes. And fixing that saves me approximately $180,000 annually, before we address the routing inefficiencies on the South Loop corridor, which is a separate problem, but a solvable one." Stavros set the report down. He looked at Jordan the way people look at someone when they are trying to figure out why they haven't met them before. "What do you charge?" Jordan told him. Stavros shook his head, but not in the direction Jordan expected. "That's too low," he said. "For what you just showed me in 4 days, that's too low, and I'm not going to take advantage of it. What do you actually need to make this worth your time?" Jordan told him a different number. "That's fair," Stavros said. "When can you start?" How was careful with money? He had always been careful with money because he had always had to be, because there was never a version of his life that allowed for carelessness. He knew how long he could go without new income, how long he could sustain operations out of savings while the consulting business found its legs. He had built a modest safety net over 10 years of careful living and had never touched it, partly out of discipline and partly because he had always known somewhere in the back of his mind that the day would come when he would need it. The day had come. He set up his office at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where he packed Amara's lunches, the same table where he wrote her notes, the same table where he had been sitting when he decided to actually write the resignation letter in January. He bought a second-hand desk chair from a resale shop on Western Avenue that cost $40 and was comfortable enough. He organized his files. He opened a business account. He named the company Mitchell Operational Solutions. Amara helped him design the logo. She was emphatic about the colors she wanted: blue and gold, because she explained with complete seriousness, blue meant trust and gold meant worth it. Jordan looked at his 8-year-old daughter and thought that she had explained the entire premise of his business in 6 words, and he let her choose the colors. He had 3 clients by the end of the first month, then 6 by the end of the second. He was not rich, not yet, not close, but he was solvent, and he was building. And every morning when he woke up at 4:47 a.m., the weight that greeted him was different from the weight that had greeted him for the previous 10 years. It was still heavy, because building something real is always heavy. But it was his weight. It belonged to him. And carrying something that belongs to you, Jordan was learning, is a fundamentally different experience from carrying something that belongs to someone else. He heard about the problems at Sterling Vale from Priya. She texted him 3 weeks after he left, not to ask him to come back, because Priya had too much dignity for that, but because she was worried about the people on their team, and she trusted him enough to be honest about it. "Jordan, things are getting complicated here. They brought in someone from the Cincinnati office to cover your role, and he's smart, but he doesn't know our accounts. Caldwell Brothers is talking about renegotiating the whole contract. The Hendricks situation hasn't been resolved. I just want you to know, not to make you feel guilty, because I know you, and I know you'd want to know." He read the message twice. He felt the pull of it. The particular pull that a person feels when something they built is struggling, and their instinct is to go fix it. He knew that feeling. He had lived inside that feeling for a decade. But he also knew something else now. He knew that the pull he felt toward Sterling Vale was not about the company. It was about the people, Priya and Darius, and the warehouse team, and the dozen other human beings who had worked alongside him and done their jobs with integrity in spite of a culture that had consistently undervalued them. The company had not earned his loyalty. The people had. And that was a distinction that mattered. He wrote back, "Thank you for telling me. You're going to be okay. You know more than you think you do. Trust yourself." She wrote back, "That's what you always said." "Because it was always true," he replied. He set his phone down and returned to work. Victoria called him on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after he left. He was sitting at his kitchen table, reviewing a report for Stavros's company, when his phone lit up with a number he didn't immediately recognize, and then the name his contacts had logged for it, V. Harrington, Sterling Vale. He looked at the phone for 2 full rings. He answered, "Jordan." Her voice was different from how he remembered it in the conference room. Not weak. Victoria Harrington's voice was structurally incapable of weakness, but something had been removed from it. The layer of absolute certainty that usually sat on top of everything she said. She sounded for the first time in his experience of her like a person talking to another person, rather than an authority addressing a subordinate. "Victoria," he said. A pause. "How are you?" He almost said fine, which was the automatic answer, the reflex. Instead, he said, "I'm good, actually good. I heard you've started something." "A consulting firm, small for now." "Mitchell Operational Solutions," she said, which meant she had looked him up, which meant this call was not casual. "I've been told you're doing good work." "I'm doing honest work." Another pause. Longer. The kind of pause that has something behind it, something being sorted through and selected and set carefully into words. "Jordan, I'd like to meet with you. Not about coming back to Sterling Vale. I know that's not something you would consider." She said this not as a question. She had read him accurately. "I want to talk about the direction the company is moving, and..." A pause. "I want to apologize." Jordan was quiet for a moment. "You want to apologize," he said. "Yes." "In person." "Yes." "Why?" He asked it simply without hostility. He genuinely wanted to understand her thinking, whether this was about the company's crisis, or about something she had actually had to reckon with inside herself. Those were two very different conversations. Victoria took a breath. "Because I spent 15 years building a company on the principle that talent is the most valuable thing a business can have. And then I spent 10 years looking at one of the most talented people in my organization and seeing everything except his talent. And when he tried to protect something I had built, I told him to leave." She stopped. "That's not a business problem, Jordan. That's a character problem. And I've been sitting with it for 6 weeks. Jordan leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in the late afternoon. The light changing the street, filling up the ordinary machinery of a city, going about its necessary business. "I'll meet with you," he said. "Thank you. I'm not making any commitments beyond the meeting." "I understand." "And Victoria." He waited a beat. "Come alone. No assistants. No David Kessler. Just you." A pause. Then, "All right." He ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet of his kitchen. On the counter, Amara's lunch was already packed for tomorrow. The note was already written. The cactus in the blue pot had put out a new arm sometime in the past week that Jordan had just noticed small green growing toward the window, with the patient certainty of something that expects to be here for a long time. He picked up his pen. He went back to work. What happened next? What he would discover when he sat across from Victoria Harrington and heard the full extent of what his absence had revealed would change the terms of everything. But that was for later. Tonight, he was exactly where he needed to be. They met at a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, not the kind of place Victoria Harrington typically occupied, which was exactly why Jordan had chosen it when she asked him to name the location. It was a neighborhood place, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and coffee that cost $3 instead of $12. The kind of place where nobody would recognize Victoria, or if they did, would care enough to make it into something. The kind of place where a conversation could be just a conversation. He arrived first. He was always early. It was reflex, the same reflex that had him at the office before sunrise for 10 years. He ordered a black coffee, found a corner table away from the window, and sat down with his hands wrapped around the mug, not looking at his phone, not reviewing notes. Just waiting. Just being present in the way that Jordan had always known how to be present, which was one of the things about him that the people who actually paid attention had found remarkable, and that the people who hadn't paid attention had never noticed. Victoria arrived 7 minutes later. She came through the door alone. No assistant trailing behind her. No driver holding it open. No iPad tucked under her arm. She wore a coat he had never seen her in before, something simpler than her usual wardrobe, and she looked for just a moment standing in the doorway, scanning the room like an ordinary person. Then she saw him, and her posture realigned. Not arrogance, not quite, but the habit of authority that 20 years of being the most powerful person in every room she entered had made into something involuntary. She walked over, sat down across from him, did not order anything immediately, looked at him with the directness that had always been one of the few things Jordan genuinely respected about her. "You look better," she said. "Than what? Than the last time I saw you." He considered that. "I probably do." She folded her hands on the table. She was gathering something he could see, the slight tension in her jaw, that meant she was choosing her words the way a person chooses words when they have rehearsed this moment, but are no longer sure the rehearsal is going to serve them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "I figured. About the company, about the decisions I've made, about—" She paused. "About what I actually value versus what I told myself I valued." Jordan waited. He did not fill the silence. He had learned a long time ago that silence was a tool, and that the people who were most uncomfortable with it were usually the people with the most to say. "I built Sterling Vale on people," Victoria said. "That was the original premise, that the right people given the right environment could accomplish extraordinary things. That's what I believed when I was starting out. When I had nothing, when I was working 18-hour days out of a rented office with secondhand furniture and 2 people who believed in me." She stopped. "Somewhere along the way, I started believing that the company was the thing, not the people, the systems, the projections, the brand." She looked at her hands. "And I convinced myself that was the same thing. It isn't the same thing." "No," Jordan said, "it isn't. The week after you left." She stopped again, started over. "I want to be precise about this. The week after you left, I told myself it was a staffing problem. A gap to be filled. I told David to manage it. I told Margaret to manage it." She looked up at him. "By the end of that week, I understood that what had walked out of that building was not a position. It was a person who had been doing the work of 4 positions and the relational labor of 20, and who had been doing all of it while being told that his opinions were above his station." Jordan said nothing. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to make myself feel better. I'm here because I owe you an honest accounting of what I got wrong, and because—" She took a breath. "Because I think you deserve to hear it from me directly, without a lawyer in the room, without an HR framework around it. Just me telling you that I was wrong. About what you were worth. About how you were treated. About the decision I dismissed." She met his eyes. "You were right about the Memphis plan. Completely right. The projections were built on outdated rate schedules and consultant optimism, and your analysis was accurate, and I knew in the room, Jordan, when you were talking that you had done the work. I just didn't want to hear it from you." The last sentence landed differently from the rest. More honest, more precise. "Why not?" Jordan asked. Not with anger, genuinely asking. He wanted to understand this, not perform understanding. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "Because hearing it from you meant acknowledging that the man I had categorized as an operations manager, as a worker, as someone doing important but essentially replaceable work, was actually smarter about my company than the people I was paying 5 times his salary to advise me." She paused. That's an uncomfortable thing to acknowledge when you've built your entire identity around being the person who sees clearly. So it was easier to dismiss me than to revise what you thought I was. Yes, she said simply. That's exactly what it was. The coffee shop moved around them a couple at the next table, talking quietly. A barista calling out a name. The ordinary rhythm of a place where ordinary things happened. Jordan looked at this woman across the table, who had just told him something true and uncomfortable about herself, and he thought about what it costs a person to do that, to actually strip the performance away and name the thing underneath. It cost something. He could see that it had cost her. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Okay. I hear you. I believe you. He wrapped both hands around his mug. Now tell me about the company, because I know you didn't ask for this meeting just to apologize. Something shifted in her face, a slight release, as though she had been holding her breath and had now been given permission to exhale. The board called an emergency meeting 2 weeks ago, she said. The Memphis numbers came back. The revised projections show that proceeding with the consolidation on the original timeline would cost us conservatively $9 million over 2 years against a projected savings of $14 million that I now believe was substantially overstated. She said this with the careful precision of someone recounting a diagnosis they were still processing. The board is unhappy. That's a diplomatic way of saying 3 of our 7 board members have formally questioned my judgment, and one of them has begun very quietly reaching out to potential replacement candidates. Jordan absorbed this. How many of the 340 positions have been eliminated? 41. We paused the reduction plan before it went further. Were the people who were let go from the Eastern Corridor facilities? 23 of them, yes. Why? Because those are the same facilities where the shipping cost differential I projected would have been most acute. The people you eliminated were the people managing the relationships that kept those numbers manageable. He said this without satisfaction. It was not a victory. It was just the truth, and truth was what the moment required. Who are you bringing in to fix it? I've had conversations with 2 large consulting firms, the same kind of firm that built the plan I told you wouldn't work. She held his gaze. Yes, which is why those conversations didn't go far. She leaned forward slightly. Jordan, I want to talk about something different, not about bringing you back to Sterling Vale. I know that's not what you want, and honestly, given everything, it's not what I'm asking. She paused. I want to talk about what you've built. Mitchell Operational Solutions, the clients you have, what you're trying to do. He studied her. Why? Because I have a problem. And you might be positioned to help solve it in a way that's actually good for both of us. She met his eyes directly. Not as an employee. Not as someone working under me. As a partner. Jordan let that word sit in the air for a moment. Partner. It was a different word from any word she had ever used with him before, and they both knew it. Tell me what you mean when you say that, he said. Precisely. Because that word can mean a lot of different things depending on who's using it. I mean equity. I mean a seat at the table that can't be moved by my mood or my convenience. I mean a structural role in the company's direction, not just its operations. She reached into the bag she had brought and pulled out a folder. She slid it across the table to him. I had legal prepare a preliminary framework. It's not final. Everything is negotiable. But I wanted to come here with something real, not just words. Jordan looked at the folder but didn't open it. Not yet. He looked at her. Victoria, why would you do this? Because I need someone I can trust. You need someone who can fix what's broken. Those are the same thing, she said. For me right now, they are the same thing. He picked up the folder. He opened it. He read in silence for several minutes, his face giving nothing away, which was a skill he had developed over years of sitting in rooms where showing too much of what you were thinking cost you something. The framework was serious. It wasn't a token gesture, he could see that immediately. Whoever she had instructed to prepare this had been told to prepare something substantive. There was equity language. There was governance language. There was a title structure that put him functionally at the same level as her senior executives, with defined authority that could not be unilaterally removed. It was real. He closed the folder. "I need time," he said. "Of course. And I need to think about this with someone I trust. Also, of course. And if I come back into that building in any capacity," he said, looking at her steadily, "the first thing that changes is the culture, not after we fix the operations, before, simultaneously. Because the operations are broken, partly because the culture broke them. You can't fix one without the other." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'm willing to hear what that looks like. It's going to look uncomfortable," he said, "for a lot of people who have gotten used to a very specific way of doing things." "I know. Including you." "I know," she said again, and this time there was something in the word that wasn't just acknowledgement. It was the sound of someone who had actually thought about this, who had sat with the discomfort of it in private, and was not pretending it would be easy. Jordan nodded once. "I'll read this tonight. I'll call you by Friday." He stood. He picked up the folder. He pulled on his coat. "Jordan," she said. He paused. "What I said in that room. If you don't agree with my leadership, then quit. I've thought about those words every day since you left, not because of what they cost the company." She looked up at him with the unguarded directness of someone who has stopped performing. "Because of what they said about me." Jordan looked at her for a long moment. "The fact that you understand that," he said quietly, "is the only reason I'm taking that folder home instead of leaving it on the table." He walked out. Marcus read the framework that same evening. Jordan had driven straight from Michigan Avenue to Hyde Park because Marcus was the person he called when something was important, not for comfort, but for the particular clarity that Marcus provided, the ability to look at a situation from every angle simultaneously without losing the emotional truth of it. Marcus read for 20 minutes without speaking. Jordan sat across from him and drank the coffee Marcus had made without asking and waited. Finally, Marcus set the folder down and leaned back. He was quiet for another 10 seconds, which for Marcus was an unusually long pause. "This is legitimate," he said. "I know. Whoever drafted this wasn't playing around. 15% equity stake, defined governance rights, a removal clause that requires board supermajority to trigger." He looked at Jordan. "She gave you actual teeth." "I saw. The question is whether the teeth are real, or whether this is a very well-drafted way of making you feel like you have power while she retains full operational control." He leaned forward. "Because that is possible even with language this strong. If the culture doesn't actually shift, the legal framework is just paper." That's what I told her. Culture first, not after. And she agreed? She said she was willing to hear what that looked like. That's not the same as agreeing. "No," Jordan said. "But it's more than she's ever said before." Marcus drummed his fingers on this table. "What does your gut say?" Jordan looked at his coffee. "My gut says she's scared, genuinely scared, not just about the board and the investors, but about the kind of person she became and didn't notice becoming." He paused. "My gut says that's real. I could feel it across the table. You can't fake that kind of reckoning when you're sitting 2 feet from someone. You've always been good at reading people." "It's kept me employed." "It's kept you alive," Marcus said, which was more precise, and they both knew it. Silence for a moment. "What about Mitchell Operational Solutions?" Marcus asked. "That continues regardless. Whatever I decide about Sterling Vale doesn't end what I've built. I won't let it." "So the question isn't whether to abandon your company. The question is whether you can be in both places at the same time." "Not at the same time," Jordan said. "But in both places, yes. With the right structure, with the right boundaries, with an agreement that protects both." Marcus looked at him steadily. "You know what this is, right? What she's actually asking." "Tell me what you think it is." "She's asking you to save something you already saved once, except this time with your name on it." Marcus held his gaze. "She's asking you to take the thing you built for her over 10 years and rebuild it, but this time as yours. As co-creator. As someone who can't be told to quit." He paused. "The question is whether the man who walked out of that building 8 weeks ago wants to walk back into it." Jordan sat with that. He thought about the conference room. The silence when he placed the envelope on the table. Victoria's face when she understood he was actually leaving. The elevator descending. The weight lifting as the doors opened into the lobby. He thought about Priya's text. The Caldwell brothers' account slipping. The 41 people who had lost their jobs because nobody understood in time what Jordan had understood for years, that the numbers on the spreadsheet were not abstract, that they had names and families and rent payments attached to them. He thought about Amara, about the blue and gold logo, about the cactus putting out a new arm on the kitchen counter, about what it meant to build something that was genuinely his. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "That's the truth." "Good," Marcus said. "Don't decide tonight." I didn't decide that night. He didn't decide the next morning either. He packed Amara's lunch and wrote her note and walked her to school. And then instead of going straight home, he walked for a while, not toward anything in particular, just walked through the kind of October morning that Chicago makes when it's deciding to stop being kind about the coming winter, the air sharp and clear, and carrying the smell of the lake from somewhere to the east. He thought about his father. His father, Robert Mitchell, had worked 31 years as an electrician for the city of Chicago. He had never been promoted. He had never been offered a seat at any table. He had gone to work every morning in the same work boots and come home every evening with the same quiet dignity. And he had raised Jordan on a set of principles that had nothing to do with status and everything to do with character. Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. Do the work that matters and do it right. Never forget that your name is the only thing that travels with you when everything else is stripped away. His father had died 6 years ago. A stroke sudden 3 days in the hospital and then gone. He had never seen Sterling Vale. He had never seen Jordan's badge or his salary or the conference rooms where his son presented reports to people who barely acknowledged his presence. But Jordan had carried his father into all of those rooms anyway, the way you carry the people who made you not as a burden, but as ballast. As something that keeps you from drifting when the current gets strong. What would his father say about this? Jordan thought he knew. His father would say, "The question isn't whether she deserves your help. The question is whether the people inside that company deserve it. And you know the answer to that." He pulled out his phone. He called Priya. She answered on the first ring. "Jordan." The relief in her voice was immediate and unguarded. "How are you? Are you okay?" "I'm good, Priya. I wanted to check in on you, on the team." He heard her exhale. It's been rough. The new guy from Cincinnati, his name's Brad. He's not bad, he doesn't know us. He doesn't know how we work. He keeps scheduling meetings to discuss things that you used to just handle, and by the time we finish discussing them, the problem has already gotten worse. She paused. "Darius is looking for other jobs. I found out yesterday. He hasn't said anything, but I could tell. Tell Darius, I said tell him to hold on, just for a little while. Can you do that?" A pause. "Jordan, are you coming back?" "I haven't decided." "But you're thinking about it." "I'm thinking about a lot of things." "Whatever you decide," she said, and her voice had steadied the relief replaced by something more solid. The sound of a person who is good at her job and knows it, and has been waiting for someone to treat her accordingly. Whatever you decide, you should know that what you built here matters. The people here remember who you were. And I don't mean just the team. I mean the guys in the warehouse, the dispatchers. Maria in accounts payable, who you always remembered, had a daughter with the same name as Amara. A pause. "You made this place better, Jordan. Not just more efficient, better." He walked half a block in silence. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Thank you for calling," she said. "That's the thing about you, you know. You still called. Most people would have walked away and never looked back." He put the phone away and kept walking. He called Victoria on Thursday, a day earlier than he'd said. "I've thought about it," he said when she answered. "And I have conditions, more than what was in the framework." "Tell me." First condition, the 41 people who were laid off. "I want to review each of their cases. The ones who were let go as part of the consolidation plan. The plan that was built on faulty projections. I want the option to reinstate the ones whose positions are genuinely needed, with full back pay for the period they were out." Silence on Victoria's end. That's going to be expensive. It's going to be less expensive than what it's going to cost you to rebuild those relationships from scratch. And more importantly, it's the right thing to do. He waited. If you can't agree to that, we stop here. Another silence. Then, all right, I'll agree to that in principle. We'll work out the details. Second condition. I want an independent review of compensation across all departments with particular attention to the operations and logistics teams. I want it benchmarked against industry standards, not internal comparisons. If people are being paid below market rate for what they actually do, not their job title, but what they actually do, I want that corrected within 6 months. That's going to require board approval. I know, get it. He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Not angry breathing, thinking breathing. Third condition, he said. I need a formal charter, not just a cultural statement, not a memo from HR. A written binding commitment to the principles I outlined in our meeting. Respect across race and background. Worker voice. Leadership accountability. With metrics attached and a review process that I'm part of. You want to hold me accountable? She said. I want the company to hold itself accountable. I want systems that work even when the humans involved aren't at their best. Because people aren't always at their best. Including me. Including you. Quiet. And the fourth condition, he said. Mitchell Operational Solutions doesn't dissolve. My company continues to operate. I maintain equity in it, and I maintain the ability to take on outside clients as long as they're not direct competitors to Sterling Vale. The work I've built is mine. That doesn't change. You want to keep your company, she said slowly. Not objecting, processing. My company is what proved to me, and apparently to the rest of the Chicago business community, that what I was doing at Sterling Vale was not just operations management. It's what established that I have value independent of any organization's willingness to recognize it. He paused. I'm not giving that up. It took 10 years and a resignation letter to get here. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Jordan, she said finally. These conditions, some of them will require me to fight for things internally that I have never had to fight for before. The back pay alone will create friction with David and the board. I know. I want you to understand what I'm saying. This isn't me saying no. This is me telling you that I'm going to have to spend real political capital. Capital I've been accumulating for 15 years to make this happen. And I'm telling you because I want you to know that I understand the weight of what you're asking, and I'm choosing to carry it anyway. Jordan felt something shift, not dramatically. Not the way things shift in movies, but the quiet, real shift of something that has been out of alignment, finding its position. Then we have something to talk about, he said. Friday, she said. My office, 9 o'clock. Bring your attorney if you have one. I'll bring Marcus Webb. A pause. Is he an attorney? He's better, Jordan said. He's someone I trust. He told Amara that night. Not all of it, she was 8, and the nuances of equity frameworks and governance clauses were not her domain. But he told her the essential thing, which was that he had decided to go back not as someone working for Victoria Harrington, but as someone working alongside her. As a partner. As someone whose name would now be part of the company's direction. Amara listened with her homework in front of her, and her pencil in her hand, and the expression she got when she was taking something seriously. So she said sorry, she asked. She did. And you believe her? I believe she means it. Whether she can follow through on it, that's what we're going to find out. What if she doesn't? Then I leave again. Except this time I'll have the agreement in writing. Amara seemed to find this logistically satisfying. She returned to her homework. Then, Dad. Yeah. Remember when you told me why you left about being worth more than what they were giving you? I remember. Is this them giving you more? Jordan thought about the folder on the table. The equity language, the governance rights, the removal clause that required a board supermajority, the way Victoria had looked at him across a coffee shop table and named the things she had done without dressing it in excuses. Yeah, baby, he said. I think it might be. She nodded satisfied with this and went back to her homework. The cactus on the counter had another new arm. Jordan hadn't noticed before, small, just starting, reaching toward the window. The Friday meeting lasted 4 hours. Marcus sat beside Jordan and said relatively little, which was the sign that Marcus was doing what he did best, absorbing everything, cataloging every response, measuring the distance between what was being said and what was being meant. Victoria's attorney was there. David Kessler was not, which Jordan had requested, and Victoria had honored, and which sent a message to everyone in the room that was louder than anything that was said. By noon, the back pay review had been agreed to. By 12:30, the independent compensation study had been written into the framework. By 1 o'clock, the charter language was being negotiated, not agreed to yet, but treated as something real that required real negotiation, rather than something Jordan had said that would be acknowledged and then quietly dissolved into the company's existing culture. The equity structure was the hardest conversation. Victoria's attorney pushed back on the removal clause. Jordan's position did not move. Marcus leaned forward at one point and said very quietly, "My client walked away from 10 years at this company because he was told his judgment didn't matter. The removal clause is the mechanism that ensures that never happens again. It is not negotiable." He leaned back. The conversation moved on. At 2 o'clock, Victoria looked across the table at Jordan and said, "I think we have enough to begin." "Begin," Jordan agreed. "Not end." "No, not end." She extended her hand. He shook it. It was a different handshake from anything that had ever happened between them before. Not an employer and an employee. Not a billionaire and a worker. Two people who had both in different ways been changed by the past 8 weeks, shaking hands across a table as the beginning of something that had no precedent for either of them. Marcus caught Jordan's eye as they gathered their things. Jordan gave him the slight nod that meant we're okay. Marcus gave him the slight nod back that meant I know. I was watching the whole time. 3 days later, Jordan walked back into Sterling Vale Corporation, not through the lobby, the way he had for 10 years. Badge swipe, elevator operations floor, head down, problem solving, before the executives arrived. He walked in through the front doors, shook the hand of the security guard whose name was Gerald, and whose daughter was applying to colleges, and whose overtime situation Jordan had quietly managed for 3 years. Gerald looked at him with an expression that started as surprise and shifted into something warmer. "Mr. Mitchell," Gerald said. "Jordan," Jordan said. "Same as always." He took the elevator to the executive floor. He had been on this floor dozens of times over 10 years for meetings, for briefings, for the particular experience of presenting information to people who would listen while looking at their phones. He had always understood on some level that this floor operated on different rules from the rest of the building. Not better rules, different ones. He walked to the office that had been prepared for him, an actual office this time, not a large cubicle behind frosted glass. He opened the door. He set down his bag. He placed the photo of Amara on the desk. He set down the mug that said, "Strong men make strong families." He put the cactus in the blue pot on the corner. Then he sat down, opened his laptop, and started working, because that was who he was. That had always been who he was. Not the title, not the floor, not the equity stake, or the governance rights, or the chair at the table that could not be moved by someone else's convenience. The work. The real work. The work of paying attention and caring about the people doing the work alongside you and solving the actual problem rather than the performance of solving it. He started with an email to Priya. "I'm back. And things are going to be different. I need you to schedule a meeting with the full operations team for Monday morning, not just leads. Everyone. Because the first thing we're going to do is listen." He sent it. Then he pulled up the file on the 41 people who had been let go. He started reading. He had been in the building for 11 minutes. The work had already begun. The Monday meeting started at 8 in the morning and ran until noon. Jordan had booked the largest conference room on the operations floor. Not the executive conference room with the mahogany table where resignations were placed and warnings were issued, but the working room on the 4th floor where the operations team had always done their actual thinking. He had asked Priya to make sure every person on the team received the invitation personally, not just a calendar notification. He wanted them to know this wasn't a mandatory assembly. It was a conversation, and their presence mattered. 37 people showed up. They filled the room past capacity. Some sat on the windowsills. A few stood near the back. Jordan stood at the front without a presentation, without a slide deck, without the kind of prepared visual framework that usually accompanied meetings of this size. He stood with his hands in his pockets and a legal pad on the table beside him. And he looked at the people who had been working inside this company while he was gone, some of whom he had known for years, some of whom were new faces that had arrived in the 8 weeks of his absence, and he started the way he started everything, with honesty. "I know some of you heard different versions of why I left," he said. "I'm not here to manage the narrative. I left because I raised concerns about a decision I believed was going to hurt this company and hurt the people who work here, and I was told that my position didn't entitle me to have those concerns taken seriously. So I made a decision." He paused. "What I want you to know is that the decision to come back is based on something different from the decision to leave. I'm back because I believe this can be different. Not better in some abstract motivational poster way, I mean structurally different, in ways that actually affect your lives." He looked around the room. "But I can't make it different alone, and I need to understand what has actually been happening in this building since I've been gone. So I'm going to stop talking, and I want you to tell me the truth. Not the version that sounds good in a meeting. The actual truth." Silence for a moment. The kind of silence that means people are deciding whether they trust something. Darius was the first to speak. He was 26. Sharp had been with the company for 2 years and had been quietly preparing to leave it when Jordan's return became something more than rumor. He leaned forward in his chair with the directness of someone who had decided the moment was worth the risk. "The coverage system they put in place after you left doesn't work," Darius said. "Brad is managing from reports. He doesn't walk the floor. He doesn't know what's actually happening until something goes wrong and someone escalates it. And by the time someone escalates it, it's already a real problem instead of a small one. How often does that happen? Twice last week, 3 times the week before." Jordan wrote something on his legal pad. "Okay, what else?" A woman named Cassandra, who ran the scheduling desk and had been with the company for 6 years, raised her hand and then lowered it, the gesture of someone who had learned to be careful. "The overtime situation. Since the schedule restructuring, we've been running between $40,000 and $60,000 a month in unplanned overtime because the coverage model doesn't account for the natural flow of the week. It looks right on paper. It doesn't work in practice." "I know about that problem," Jordan said. "I'm going to fix it. What else?" They talked for 4 hours. Jordan wrote. He asked follow-up questions. He did not interrupt. He did not get defensive. He did not explain why the problems existed or how they were understandable given the circumstances. He just listened and wrote, and occasionally nodded in a way that communicated something most of the people in the room had not experienced enough from management, that they were being heard by someone who intended to do something about what they were saying. By the end, the legal pad had 12 pages of notes. He looked around the room. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "Everything you told me today, this isn't intelligence I'm taking to the executive floor to justify decisions that have already been made. This is the foundation of the actual plan. These problems that you described are the problems we're going to fix in the order that matters most to the people doing the work." He paused. "I also want you to know that if at any point you feel like that's not what's happening, if you feel like the information you shared today is being used to manage you rather than serve you, I want you to tell me, directly. Don't manage it upward. Tell me." Priya was watching him from the second row. She had not said much during the meeting. She was a listener first, a talker second, which was one of the reasons Jordan trusted her, but now she spoke. "How do we know things are actually different?" "You don't," Jordan said. "Not yet. You're going to have to watch and decide over time whether what I do matches what I say." "That's fair. I'm not asking you to trust me because I showed back up. I'm asking you to give me enough rope to either build something with it or hang myself." A few people laughed. Actual laughs, not polite ones. Okay, Priya said, and she was smiling just slightly, the smile of someone who had missed something specific and was feeling its return. He worked 18 hours a day for the first 2 weeks. Not the grinding survival mode 18 hours he had worked as an operations manager, the kind of hours born from necessity and under support. These were different hours. These were the hours of someone building something, of someone who understood exactly what needed to be done and had been given the actual authority to do it. The first order of business was the 41. He had spent the weekend reading every file, every termination record, every performance review, every piece of documentation generated by the people who had been let go. He had made calls. He had spoken to 17 of the 41 directly because he believed that the only honest way to understand a situation was to talk to the people inside it. Of the 41 who had been laid off, 34 had been directly connected to the Eastern Corridor distribution network that the Memphis Consolidation Plan had targeted. These were the people whose relationships, whose local knowledge, whose daily presence had been the actual mechanism by which Sterling Vale's Eastern operations functioned. The consulting firm had looked at their positions and seen redundancy. Jordan looked at their positions and saw load-bearing walls. He took his findings to Victoria on a Wednesday. She was sitting behind her desk when he came in, and she looked. He noticed this because he always noticed things like someone who had not been sleeping particularly well, not unraveling. Victoria did not unravel, but carrying something. 26 of the 34, he said, placing a document on her desk. Those are the ones I recommend reinstating. The other 8 had positions that genuinely won't fit the restructured model, and I've made notes on each case, severance extensions, references, 2 of them. I want to help place specifically because they're exceptional. He sat down across from her. The back pay on the 26 is going to be approximately $340,000 total. I want it positioned not as a correction, but as a recognition of wrongful termination, because that's what it was. Victoria looked at the document. She turned pages slowly. David is going to fight this. I know. Do you want to tell me how you're going to handle that? Or do you want me to be in the room when you do? She looked up. Something passed across her face, not quite amusement, but the distant relative of it. You want to be in the room. I think it's important for David to understand that this is not a negotiation between you and him. This is a decision that's been made. You think I can't hold that line alone? I think you've held that line alone your whole career, Jordan said. And I think having someone sitting beside you who is structurally your equal changes the dynamic in ways that are useful. He held her gaze. That's what a partner is for. She was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. Friday. David, Margaret, and the 2 board members who've been most vocal. I'll have Claire set it. One more thing, Jordan said. I want HR there too, not just as a facilitator, as a party to the conversation. Because what we're doing with the 26 is also setting a precedent for how this company handles people going forward, and HR needs to understand that from the ground up. Victoria looked at him steadily. You've been back 10 days. I know. You're already changing the architecture of how this company makes decisions. That's what you asked me to do. She looked at the document again. Then she nodded, once the nod she used when she had made a decision and was done deliberating. Friday, she said. The Friday meeting with David Kessler was by any reasonable measure a confrontation. David had not been warm toward Jordan's return. He had not been openly hostile. David Kessler was too calculated for open hostility, but his particular brand of managed cordiality made clear that he viewed Jordan's new position as a structural anomaly that he was prepared to wait out. The equity stake. The governance rights. The removal clause. These were to David contractual inconveniences that would eventually be rendered moot by the practical reality of who had been running this company for 15 years. He had seen consultants and reform initiatives and structural reorgs come and go. He had survived them all by understanding that patience was a more reliable weapon than confrontation. What David had not correctly calibrated was that Jordan Mitchell was not a reform initiative. He was a person. The meeting started with David presenting his objection to the back pay as a financial matter. $340,000 in a quarter that is already projecting below plan, he said with the measured reasonableness of someone who expected the math to do his fighting for him. Jordan let him finish. Then he said, "David, can I ask you a question?" David looked at him with the expression of someone who was not accustomed to being asked questions in meetings he was running. "Go ahead." The 34 people who were let go as part of the Memphis consolidation, were any of them given a reason for their termination that acknowledged the plan they were terminated for turned out to be built on incorrect projections? A pause. That's not typically how separations are communicated. I know it's not typically how they're communicated. I'm asking whether it happened in this case. No. So we let 34 people go. We told them their positions were redundant, and we didn't disclose that the underlying plan that made them redundant was going to be substantially revised within 3 months. Jordan kept his voice level, factual. I want you to think about what that means from a legal exposure standpoint, independent of the ethical question. Because I've already thought about it, and our outside counsel has already thought about it, and I'd encourage you to think about it before we continue the conversation about whether $340,000 is a number worth fighting. The two board members who were present looked at each other. David looked at his papers. I'll also note, Jordan continued, that 23 of the 34 were from our Eastern Corridor facilities, where the racial and demographic composition of the workforce skews significantly toward Black and Latino workers. I'm not making an accusation. I'm naming a fact that if this ever became a legal matter, would be named by someone else with considerably less collegial intent. He paused. The $340,000 is not a cost, it's insurance, and it's the right thing to do. The meeting was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Victoria looked at David. Her expression said nothing and everything simultaneously. David looked at Jordan with the look of a man recalibrating his understanding of the terrain. He had been prepared for a conversation about numbers. He had not been prepared for a conversation about legal exposure and workforce demographics, delivered with the calm precision of someone who had done his homework before walking into the room. I'll need to review the legal analysis, David said. I'll have it to you by end of day, Jordan said, along with the proposed communication framework for the 26 reinstatements. I want the messaging right. These people deserve to hear this the right way. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. The reinstatements were approved. In the hallway afterward, Margaret Chu fell into step beside Jordan. She was quiet for a beat before she spoke. That was something, she said. It was a business meeting. It was a business meeting where you just moved David Kessler. She glanced sideways at him. I've been trying to move David Kessler for 6 years. Jordan almost smiled. You were working against him. I worked around him. There's a distinction. There's a significant distinction, he said. I gave him an exit that wasn't humiliation. He can frame the reinstatements as due diligence, as risk management. His ego stays intact. The outcome is the same. He paused. People fight hardest when they're cornered. If you give them a door, most of them will walk through it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Where did you learn that? Raising a kid alone, he said. You don't win arguments with an 8-year-old by being louder. You find the thing they actually need and give them that. She laughed a real laugh surprised out of her. Jordan, I'm glad you came back. So am I, he said. Most days. The calls to the 26 happened over 3 days. Jordan made them personally. Not HR. Not a generic letter. Not a representative. Him. He called each of the 26 people who were being reinstated, and he told them the truth, that the plan that had led to their termination had been built on incorrect projections, that their positions had not been redundant, that the company had made a mistake, and that if they were willing to return, they would be welcomed back with full back pay for the period they were out, and a commitment from him personally that the culture they were returning to was different from the one they had left. Some of them said yes immediately. Some of them needed time. 2 of them said no one had found something better, which Jordan told her he was glad to hear, and one was not ready to trust anything that came with the Sterling Vale name attached to it, which Jordan told him he understood completely. One of the calls was with a man named Theodore, who had run the loading dock at the Cleveland facility for 11 years. Theodore was 61 years old. He had a wife with a medical condition that required continuous insurance coverage, and the 8 weeks without it had cost him money he didn't have and created stress that had affected his health. He didn't say any of this directly. He said it the way men of a certain generation say difficult things, in implication around the edges, in the pauses between sentences. Jordan listened to all of it. Then he said, "Theodore, I can't undo the 8 weeks. I wish I could. What I can tell you is that we're covering the out-of-pocket medical expenses from the gap period as part of the reinstatement package. That should have been in the initial communication. I'm sorry it wasn't." A long pause. "You're covering the medical bills," Theodore said. "Yes." "That's not in any reinstatement letter I've ever seen." "It's in yours." Another pause. Longer. "Mr. Mitchell," Theodore said, and his voice had shifted. Something had moved in it, some resistance that had been holding the whole conversation at arm's length. "I'll come back, but I need you to know something." "Tell me." "I've worked for a lot of companies in my life, and in my experience, when a black man or a man my age gets let go by a company like this, that's the end of the story. You don't get a call. You don't get an apology. You get a box for your things and a handshake from security." He paused. "So I need you to understand what this call means. Not just the money, the call itself." Jordan was quiet for a moment. He was in his office door, closed the photo of Amara on his desk, the cactus in its blue pot on the corner. "I understand," he said. "That's exactly why I made it." Changing the culture of a company was not Jordan discovered a single dramatic event. It was not a speech or a memo or a company-wide meeting where everyone nodded and felt moved and then walked back to their desks and continued doing things the way they had always done them. It was not a policy document or a charter, however carefully written. Those things mattered. They created structure. They set expectations. They gave people language to use when something was wrong. But they were the frame, not the house. The house was built by thousands of smaller things. By Jordan walking the warehouse floor every morning and knowing the workers' names, not performing the knowing, but actually knowing, actually asking, actually remembering what he was told. By him pushing back in meetings when a decision was being made too quickly or without enough input from the people closest to the work, or on the basis of a metric that looked clean on a dashboard but obscured something true and complicated underneath. By him telling Priya that her assessment of the scheduling system was correct and implementing her proposed solution without first sending it to 3 layers of management for approval that would have added 6 weeks and drained the energy out of a good idea. By him treating people as though their time and their intelligence and their knowledge of their own work were things that deserved respect. It accumulated. It was slow, the way real things are slow. But 3 weeks in Darius had taken his resume off the job boards. 4 weeks in 2 of the warehouse leads, who had been visibly disengaged since Jordan left, came to him separately with suggestions they had been sitting on for months. Not because they hadn't had ideas, but because the previous culture had made it clear that ideas from that level of the building were not the kind of ideas that traveled upward. Jordan took both suggestions. He implemented one immediately and put the other in a formal proposal that he presented to Victoria the following week. Victoria approved it. When Jordan told the warehouse lead, a broad-shouldered, soft-spoken man named Earl, who had been with the company for 14 years, that his suggestion was being implemented, Earl looked at him with the expression of someone who has been told something that they cannot quite process yet. "My idea," Earl said. "Your idea. They're actually doing it. We're actually doing it." Earl was quiet for a moment. "Jordan, Mr. Mitchell." "Jordan. Jordan." He shook his head slowly. "I had that idea for 3 years." Jordan held his gaze. "I know. Oh. And that's something we're going to make sure doesn't happen anymore. Not for you. Not for anyone in this building." He paused. "You've been here 14 years. You've seen things. You know things. Your brain is a resource that this company has been wasting. We're going to stop doing that." Earl looked at him for a long moment. "Why do you actually care?" he asked, not rudely, not cynically, but with the genuine curiosity of someone who has been in enough workplaces to know that the stated answer and the real answer are usually different things. Jordan thought about Theodore's voice on the phone, about his father's work boots, about Amara's note folded inside her lunch bag every morning. "Because I've been you," he said simply. "In every room I walked into for 10 years. I know what it costs. And I know what it costs the company when people like you and me are treated like we're background." He paused. "So it's not just ethics. It's also that I'm tired of watching companies bleed value because the people at the top are too proud to look down and see where the real work is being done." Earl nodded slowly, the nod of someone who has heard something true. The compensation review arrived 6 weeks after Jordan's return. He had commissioned it from an independent firm, not Hartwell Consulting. Not any firm that had existing relationships with Sterling Vale's executive team, but a boutique HR analytics group out of Minneapolis that was known for rigor and no particular loyalty to flattering findings. The results were exactly what Jordan had expected. Across the operations, logistics, and support divisions, the divisions that were disproportionately staffed by Black and Latino workers, by women, by people without 4-year degrees, the median compensation was 22% below industry benchmark for comparable roles. Not for lesser work. For the same work performed at the same level, in some cases performed better. The gap was not distributed randomly. It followed with uncomfortable clarity the fault lines of race and gender and educational credential that Jordan had felt in every meeting and every overlooked report, and every conversation where his opinion had been treated as the wrong kind of voice for the room. The report also identified 6 people who were carrying responsibilities that were multiple grades above their compensation level. Jordan was not surprised to find that 5 of the 6 were people who had spent years doing what he had spent years doing, absorbing work that floated downward from positions above them, solving problems that weren't technically theirs to solve, being quietly indispensable in ways that never translated into the formal recognition that would have translated into pay. He brought the report to Victoria with a correction plan attached. The correction would cost $2.1 million in the first year. Victoria looked at the number and did not flinch, which told him something about what the past 2 months had done to her relationship with certain kinds of discomfort. "Walk me through the correction plan," she said. He walked her through it. Salary bands, grade reclassifications, retroactive adjustments for the 6 people carrying outsized responsibility. A timeline that compressed the corrections into 9 months rather than the industry standard 18, because Jordan believed that the amount of time a company takes to correct an injustice once it's identified is itself a signal about how seriously it takes the injustice. 9 months, Victoria said. Yes. The board is going to want 18. The board is going to want to table it, Jordan said. The question is what you want. She looked at him directly. 9 months, she said. He nodded. Jordan. Her voice shifted not to something softer exactly, but to something more considered. The voice she used when she was saying something that was costing her. I looked at these numbers for a long time last night. The compensation gap, the distribution of it. She paused. I knew it was there. Not these specific numbers, but I knew there was a gap. And I told myself it was structural legacy pay bands, market variation, job classification differences. The story that makes the gap look like math instead of choice. It was choice, Jordan said, not harshly, just factually. Yes, she said. It was choice, or the absence of choice, which is the same thing, the absence of choosing to look. She held his gaze. I'm telling you, I know what this is. I'm not looking for absolution. I'm just naming it because I think that's important that I say it out loud rather than let it live in the subtext. Jordan thought about the 4 pages of his legal pad from the first morning he sat at his kitchen table after leaving. All the things he knew how to do. The list that had surprised him with its length. It's important, he said. Keep saying it. David Kessler called Jordan on a Tuesday afternoon. Not an email. Not a meeting request through Claire. A direct call, the kind that meant something was happening that David did not want documented in any preliminary form. Jordan answered. I want to talk, David said. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Can you come to my office? Jordan paused. In 10 years at Sterling Vale, David Kessler had never once asked him to come to his office. The communication had always traveled the other direction, summoned, not invited. "I have 15 minutes at 4 o'clock, Jordan said. 4 o'clock is fine. He arrived at 4. David's office was larger than his, which Jordan expected, and did not particularly care about. David was standing near the window, not behind his desk, the posture of someone who had decided not to put furniture between himself and the conversation he needed to have. "I owe you an apology," David said. Jordan waited. "I dismissed your analysis in February. The Memphis projections." He said this with the particular difficulty of someone for whom admitting error is a physical experience. "You were right. The projections were wrong. The consultant model was built on assumptions I should have challenged, and didn't, partly because it aligned with the outcome I had already decided was correct." A pause. "I could give you context. I had a board timeline I was working against, and a CFO mandate to show significant savings in Q2. But context isn't the same as justification." Jordan looked at this man who had looked through him for years. Not past him exactly. David had always been aware of Jordan's presence, but through him in the way that people look through something they have categorized as a medium rather than a person. "I appreciate you saying it directly," Jordan said. "The culture thing." David shifted slightly. "The charter, the compensation review, the reinstatements." He paused. "I want you to know I'm not going to work against it. I was. Initially, I thought it was going to create more disruption than the company could absorb while we were already managing a financial correction." He looked at Jordan steadily. "But I've watched the floor for the last 6 weeks. I've watched what happens when people are treated differently, and the productivity metrics are already moving." "I know," Jordan said. "It doesn't usually work that fast. It works fast when the people it affects have been waiting a long time for it." Jordan held the man's gaze. "They were already doing the work, David. They were already giving everything they had. They just stopped believing it mattered. When you give someone their belief back, the work was already there." David was quiet for the moment. He looked at Jordan with something that was not quite respect yet, but was the thing that comes just before respect, when a man is being honest with himself about something he should have seen earlier. "I'm going to try to be more useful to what you're building," he said. "I can't promise you I'll always agree, but I'll engage with it honestly." "That's all I've ever asked of anyone," Jordan said. He left David's office at 4:18. He took the elevator back to the operations floor, walked to his office, sat down. He looked at the photo of Amara. He thought about what she had said the night he told her he was going back. "Is this them giving you more?" He picked up his phone. He texted Marcus. Kessler just apologized, voluntarily, in person. Marcus replied in 30 seconds. "Who are you and what have you done with David Kessler?" Jordan smiled. Genuinely. The kind of smile that means something. He put the phone in his pocket and got back to work. Outside the window, Chicago moved through its November afternoon gray and cold and entirely itself. Inside on the 4th floor, Earl was implementing his idea. Priya was running a scheduling test on the new system. Darius was in a meeting that Jordan had put him in charge of leading because Darius was ready and had been ready for a year and no one had told him. Theodore was back at the loading dock in Cleveland. 25 other people were back. And Jordan Mitchell, who had walked out of this building 8 weeks ago with a cardboard box and a cactus, and the absolute certainty that he was worth more than what he had been given. Jordan Mitchell was sitting at a desk that now had his name on the door and a title that matched what he had always been doing. It wasn't finished. It was barely started. But it was real. And real was enough for now to keep building. 1 year after Jordan Mitchell placed a sealed envelope on a mahogany conference table and walked out of a building where he had given a decade of his life, Sterling Vale Corporation held its annual company-wide gathering in the main event space on the ground floor. It was the same building, the same lobby with the marble wall where the mission statement was carved in silver letters, the same elevator banks, the same fluorescent lights in the hallway that Jordan had always known by their particular sounds and rhythms. But the room that morning felt different from any room Sterling Vale had assembled before. Not because of the decorations, or the catering, or the audio-visual setup, though all of that was finer than it had been in previous years. It felt different because of the people in it. Theodore was there sitting in the third row with his wife beside him. She had wanted to come, he had told Jordan the week before, because she wanted to see the place that had given her husband back to himself. Cassandra from scheduling was there. Earl from the warehouse division sat near the front, with the quiet presence of a man who had spent 14 years being overlooked and had only recently begun to understand that being overlooked was not the same as being unimportant. Darius was there in a suit that he had bought for the occasion, because 3 months earlier, Jordan had promoted him to operations lead, and Darius had responded to the promotion the way people respond when something they worked for, without being sure it would ever arrive, finally arrives with a steadiness that was more powerful than excitement. The steadiness of someone who had been ready and was now being trusted to prove it. Priya sat beside Darius and caught Jordan's eye across the room when he walked in and gave him the look that meant, "We made it this far." He gave her the look back that meant, "I know." Victoria Harrington stood at the front of the room waiting for the gathering to settle. She was dressed the way she always dressed, precisely, deliberately, the armor of someone who understood that appearance was a form of communication. But she held herself differently than she had a year ago. Less like a monument, more like a person. Jordan took a seat near the back. He had told Victoria, when she mentioned the gathering, that he did not need to be on stage. He was not interested in a moment that looked like a redemption arc, packaged for public consumption. The prodigal manager returned. The billionaire humbled the happy ending assembled for the audience. What had happened over the past year was real and complicated and ongoing, and he did not want it reduced to a narrative that ended too cleanly, because real things do not end cleanly. They continue, and their continuing is the point. Victoria had listened to this. She had agreed mostly. And then she had said, "I still need you there, not on stage, just there." So he was there. She opened by doing something Jordan had never heard a CEO do at a company meeting. She did not talk about the company's numbers first. She did not present a quarter's results or preview a new strategic initiative. She stood at the front of the room and she talked about a mistake. Not in the abstract way that leaders sometimes talk about mistakes. The passive, institutional, "we made some decisions" that in retrospect, the language designed to acknowledge error without anyone specific having to own it. She named what had happened. She said that a year ago Sterling Vale had nearly destroyed itself with a decision that had been warned against by someone who understood the company better than the people who were paid most to understand it. She said that the person who delivered that warning had been dismissed not because his analysis was wrong, but because of assumptions made about what kind of person was worth listening to. She said that those assumptions had cost 41 people. Their jobs had cost the company millions of dollars and had cost her something harder to quantify, but more important, the ability to tell herself she was the kind of leader she thought she was. The room was very quiet. "I'm not telling you this because I think public acknowledgement excuses what happened," Victoria said. "I'm telling you because the culture of this company, the real culture, not the version on the mission statement on the wall outside, has to be built on people telling the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And I can't ask that of you if I'm not willing to do it myself." She paused. "We are a different company today than we were a year ago. Not because we wrote a charter, or revised a compensation structure, or reinstated people who should never have been let go. Though we did all of those things, and they matter. We are different because we chose to be different. And that choice has to be made again every day by every person in this room." She looked out at the faces in front of her. "The person most responsible for that difference is not me," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I created the conditions that nearly broke this company. The person who gave us the map back, who built the road we've been walking on for the past year, is someone most of you already know. And I want to make sure you know that I know what he is. Not what his job title says. What he actually is." She did not look at Jordan. She did not point. She did not turn the moment into a performance of gratitude that would have embarrassed him. She simply said his name once clearly, and then said, "This company is better because of him. Full stop." In the third row, Theodore's wife reached over and took her husband's hand. Across the room, Earl exhaled slowly, the exhale of someone releasing something he had been holding without knowing he was holding it. Jordan sat in the back of the room and looked at his hands and let the moment be what it was without trying to manage it. After the gathering, he took the elevator to the 4th floor and walked to his office and sat down. The photo of Amara was on his desk. The mug his mother had given him. The cactus in the blue pot which had grown so much in the past year that it had required a larger pot. 2 months ago, Amara had picked out the new one terracotta with a painted stripe around the middle blue and gold. He had calls to make. He had a proposal to review for Mitchell Operational Solutions' newest client, a mid-sized distribution company in Indianapolis, that was dealing with exactly the kind of structural problem that Jordan had spent 10 years solving quietly for someone else, and was now able to solve publicly for a fee that reflected what the work was actually worth. His company had 14 clients now. He had brought on 2 consultants, both people who understood operational work from the inside, both people who had been undervalued in their previous positions, and were building their own proof that the undervaluation had been wrong. I was in the middle of reviewing the Indianapolis proposal when Priya knocked. "You got a minute?" "Come in." She sat down across from him. She had something in her hands, a printout. She set it on his desk. He looked at it. It was an industry report. The headline referenced Sterling Vale's inclusion in a list of the top 20 most improved workplace cultures in the country, based on a survey of employees across multiple sectors. "Darius found it this morning," she said. "He wanted me to tell you." Jordan looked at the page. He read the brief paragraph about Sterling Vale. It mentioned the compensation review, the reinstatements, the charter. What it described as a radical shift in operational philosophy under new co-leadership. It used the word remarkable to describe the pace of the change. He put the page down. "How's the team feeling about it?" he asked. "Earl cried a little," she said. "Don't tell him I told you that." "I won't." Cassandra printed it out and put it on the break room bulletin board. Priya smiled. "Darius sent it to his mom." Jordan nodded. He looked at the page again. Then he slid it back across the desk toward Priya. "Put that on the bulletin board too, next to Cassandra's copy." She picked it up. She was almost at the door when she stopped, turned back. "Jordan, can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. When you left last year, when you picked up that box and walked out, did you know it was going to turn out like this?" He thought about it. Really thought about it the way the question deserved. He thought about the elevator descending, the weightlifting, the kitchen table at 4 in the morning, and the legal pad, and the list of everything he knew how to do. The blue and gold logo. Amara asking if he was okay at the school gate. "No," he said. "I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I knew how I was going to be regardless of how it turned out. That's the only thing I actually knew." Priya was quiet for a moment. "That's the difference between you and most people," she said. "Most people know their worth," Jordan said. "They just get talked out of it over time. By systems, by institutions, by the accumulation of small signals that say your kind of knowing doesn't count here." He paused. "I stopped letting myself be talked out of it. That's all." She looked at him with the expression of someone filing something away in a place they intend to keep. Then she nodded once, tucked the printout under her arm, and went back to work. He called Marcus from the parking garage at 5:30. It was their ritual, the end-of-week call that had survived every version of the past year through the building of Mitchell Operational Solutions and the negotiations with Victoria and the return to Sterling Vale and every complicated week in between. Marcus answered the same way he always answered. "Tell me something real," Marcus said. "Victoria gave a speech today. She named what she got wrong, in public, in front of the whole company." A pause. "How did it land?" "Like something true," Jordan said. "People know the difference." "And you? How are you?" Jordan sat in his car in the parking garage for a moment, the city evening pressing in at the entrance. He thought about the gathering, about Theodore's wife taking his hand, about Earl's exhale, about Darius in his new suit. About Amara, who right now was at home with the sitter finishing her homework and waiting for her father to come home and cook dinner, which was the best part of his day, which had always been the best part of his day. "I'm good," he said. "Actually good. Actually good." Marcus was quiet for a beat. The comfortable quiet of two men who have known each other long enough that silence has content. Then, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "Tell me." "That Sunday in January, when you called me to tell me you'd written the resignation letter. You hadn't sent it yet. You were just telling me it existed." He paused. "I asked you if you were sure. You said you weren't sure about the outcome. You were sure about yourself." Jordan remembered. He had been sitting at the kitchen table, the flickering light, the city outside. "You were the first person I told," Jordan said. "I know. I've always known what that meant." Marcus paused. "I just want you to know I was never worried about you. Not once. Even when things were uncertain. Because I know who you are, and I knew the world was going to figure it out eventually." Jordan looked through the windshield at the city. "My father would have liked seeing this," he said quietly. "Your father sees it," Marcus said. "I genuinely believe that." They said goodbye. Jordan started the car and drove home. Amara was at the kitchen table when he came in. The same kitchen table where all of it had started: the resignation letter, the legal pad, the blue and gold logo, the list of everything he was worth. She had her homework spread across it the way she always did, organized in a specific pattern that only she understood. Pencils lined up with the care of someone who believed that the arrangement of her tools affected the quality of her thinking. She looked up when he came in. Looked at his face the way she always looked at his face. Reading the paragraph behind the word. "Good day," she asked. "Really good day." "The meeting was today." "Yeah." "How was it?" He hung up his coat. He moved to the kitchen to start dinner habit, the good kind, the kind built by consistency rather than obligation. Victoria gave a speech. She told the truth about some things that were hard to say. About you, about what she did wrong, and yeah, about me. Amara was quiet for a moment, turning this over. Was it weird hearing her say it in front of everyone? He thought about it. It was right, he said. Not weird, right. She seemed to find this satisfying. She returned to her homework. He started cooking. The kitchen filled with the sounds and smells that he had built his life around, the sounds of a real home, a functioning home, a home that had survived everything the past year had asked of it. After a while, Amara said without looking up from her page, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Remember at the beginning when you first left Sterling Vale, I asked you why you left when you had such a good job?" "I remember. And you said sometimes losing a position is the only way to find your worth." He turned from the stove. She was looking at him now with those eyes that saw the paragraph, the eyes that had never let him get away with anything less than the truth. "I've been thinking about that," she said, "for like a whole year." "What did you decide?" She looked at him with the seriousness of someone who has thought about something genuinely and arrived at something genuinely. "I think it's not exactly right," she said. He waited. "I think you already knew your worth. You knew it the whole time. You just stopped being in a place that pretended it didn't exist." She paused. "You didn't find your worth by leaving. You just stopped hiding it." Jordan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, 9 in 3 months. The person he had written notes to every morning for years. You are the bravest person I know," and who had apparently been writing notes back to him in the currency of attention and thought, and the particular intelligence of someone who loved him enough to tell him the true thing. "You're smarter than me," he said. "I know," she said, and went back to her homework. He turned back to the stove. His chest was full of something he did not have precise language for, not happiness exactly, though happiness was part of it. Something larger and more durable than happiness. The feeling of a life that is being lived in alignment with itself. Of work that is genuinely yours. Of a daughter who sees you clearly and loves what she sees. Of a name that means something not because an institution put it on a contract or a door or a company listing, but because it was built from the inside out, from principle and persistence, and the refusal to let the world's assessment of you become your own. The cactus, in its blue and gold pot, sat on the counter. It had a new arm Jordan had not noticed until now, small just beginning, reaching toward the window with the patient certainty of something that intends to keep growing. 3 months later, Jordan Mitchell spoke at a leadership forum in downtown Chicago. It was a mid-size gathering: business owners, community leaders, a few corporate executives, people who worked in education and nonprofit and civic institutions. Not a stadium. Not a nationally televised event. A room of 300 people in a hotel ballroom, the kind of event that doesn't make the news but matters to the people inside it. The organizer had asked him to speak about change, about what it took to rebuild something that had been broken, about what leadership actually meant when you stripped away the titles and the compensation and the structural authority and looked at what was left. He stood at the podium and he did not use notes. He talked about his father's work boots. He talked about Amara's eyes. He talked about a conference room and a sealed envelope and an elevator descending. He talked about Theodore without using his name, about a man who had been told by his termination that his 11 years of work had been incidental, and who had answered a phone call and heard something different, and who had come back and was still there, still showing up every morning, still doing the work with a dignity that no organization had given him, and no organization had been able to take. He talked about what it costs a person to carry the weight of being consistently underestimated, how it accumulates, how you develop compensating mechanisms, the careful voice, the controlled face, the discipline of never letting frustration be the thing people see. Because you understand that in certain rooms, the moment you appear to feel something strongly is the moment the conversation shifts from the substance of what you said to the manner in which you said it. How that discipline protects you and also costs you. How much energy goes into simply existing with integrity in a space that has decided before you opened your mouth what kind of knowing you're capable of. And he talked about what happens when that weight is lifted. Not when someone gives you permission to put it down. You don't wait for permission, because permission is not how worth works, but when you make the decision yourself that you are no longer willing to carry it. When you understand that the space that requires you to make yourself smaller to fit inside it is not a space worthy of what you are. I didn't leave Sterling Vale because I gave up on it, he said near the end. I left because staying under those terms would have required me to give up on myself. And the thing about that trade, the thing I needed the people in that building to understand, is that it's not just the individual who loses. When you dim a person's light to keep the room comfortable, everyone in the room ends up working in the dark. He paused. The people who are sitting in your organizations right now, the ones who are doing the work that holds everything together, who are solving problems before anyone knows the problems exist, who are carrying institutional knowledge that lives nowhere except in their minds, because nobody ever thought to write it down or recognize it formally. Those people are not your support staff. They are not your operations layer. They are not resources to be allocated. He looked out at the room. They are the reason your organization functions, and every day you go without understanding, that is a day you are paying full price for a fraction of what they have to give. The room was quiet, in the particular way that rooms are quiet when something has been said that people are going to sit with for a long time. I am standing here today, Jordan said, not because a billionaire decided I had value. I am standing here because I already knew I had value. And I refused finally after too many years of not refusing to be in any room at any table under any title that required me to pretend otherwise. He stepped back from the podium. The applause started slowly and built the way. Real things build, not from a cue, not from performance, but from the recognition of something true. He stood there and received it without false modesty and without grandiosity, because it did not belong to him alone. It belonged to his father's work boots, to the note in Amara's lunch bag, to Theodore's 11 years on a loading dock, to Earl's idea that had waited 3 years for someone to listen, to Priya and Darius and every person who had showed up to a Monday morning meeting because they were willing to believe one more time that this time things might actually be different. It belonged to all of them, and they had all earned it. The world had looked at Jordan Mitchell and seen what it always sees when it looks, without paying attention. The worn shoes, the badge from the wrong floor, the man who could be replaced, who could be dismissed, who could be dared to quit without consequence, because surely, a man in his position would not call the bluff. The world had been wrong, not because Jordan was exceptional in the way that stories sometimes make their protagonists exceptional, gifted beyond measure, uniquely positioned, destined by some narrative logic to prevail. He was exceptional in the way that thousands of people are exceptional quietly without recognition in buildings and warehouses and schools and loading docks across this country every single day. People who know more than they are paid to know, who care more than they are thanked for caring, who carry more than they are acknowledged for carrying. What Jordan had that not everyone finds, not because they lack it, but because the finding requires a moment of absolute clarity that is hard to reach. When survival is the primary concern, was the knowledge made into action that his worth was not a negotiation. It was not something the institution could grant him or revoke. It existed independently of whether they saw it. And the day he acted on that knowledge was the day the institution began to understand what it had been taking for granted. He had not changed Sterling Vale by becoming someone different. He had changed it by refusing to be treated as less than who he already was. That was the whole story. Not the resolution, not the equity stake, not the title on the door or the chair at the table or the industry report on the bulletin board in the break room. Those were the evidence of something. The thing itself was simpler and harder and more human than any of that. A man who knew his worth, who taught himself not to hide it, who walked into the hardest room of his life and placed an envelope on a table and let the silence that followed say what 10 years of careful words had not been able to make anyone hear. And in doing so, he did not just save himself. He built something that made it possible for the Theodore and the Earl and the Darius and the Priya, all the people whose lights had been dimmed in the service of keeping certain rooms comfortable, to finally fully work in the light. That is what real leadership is. That is what real worth looks like when it stops apologizing for itself. And that is the story of a man who was told to quit and instead built